everybody, Captain Murphy here from PiratesAhoy.net. Today we're going to go over the cannon system, and I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible because it's actually a very complicated system. The cannons are placed based on the firing point information, just like we covered in the previous video. Each cannon that gets brought into the game is an independent, unique type. So when this cannon was placed into the game, it's a 18-pound, made in 1732. It's a 9-foot 6-inch, and it weighs 47. I guess counterweight, something like that. Anyway, it has all this information tied to the gun, and this specific gun is then attached to that firing point, like we covered in the previous system. So with this gun, it also has a lot of other information that's unique to it, that's covered, that the cannon itself handles outside of the firing point. So when the gun gets placed, it puts the origin point of the object, of the gun, on the firing point specifically. Now the firing point has to be assigned how far the firing point is from the nearest gunnel or bulwark so that the gun can run out to. And it also has to know the distance between the firing point and the nearest obstacle in the recoil direction. So it has to know these two directions in order to know what kind of guns can even go in the position. The gun then places itself at the firing point, and it knows where from its origin point is to the front of the carriage and from its origin point to the rear of the carriage. So it knows its essential obstacle distance that it can take up. So when the gun is placed and we tell it to run out, it knows that because of its distance is known, and it knows the distance between the firing point and the gunnel, it then knows how far forward it needs to run to go to the run out position. And this is all done during the instantiation of the cannon. So when the cannon gets instantiated on the vessel and placed, it does this work. It places that point in the cannon entity, so that way it can, know that this cannon goes to this point to run out. And it's not having to be done every single time the gun fires. It also then takes from that firing point run out position, it then knows how far it's going to recoil from that point, and that's determined by the cannon itself and what kind of ammunition. But what we're looking for is the maximum recoiling distance. So if you put like a double shot, here's how far back it would maximum recoil. From that point, we know that in between those two points, we can then move a specific percentage of that distance based on how powerful the shot is that's being fired. So a double shot might move the object 2 meters to the rear, whereas a single shot may only move it 1. And so we know that we just have to move it along that axis between the 2 points and not exceed that maximum recoil distance when we do the firing. Okay. So the other thing we can do is we determine the direction that the gun is pointing by using 2 points inside of the barrel object. And the barrel object is separate from the carriage and can be rotated based on a pinpoint that's placed by the modeler. So when the gun elevation changes, it actually can rotate on that pin that the modeler has placed, and it's actually going to respond to it. So when you tell the gunners to increase elevation to try to reach 400 yards, it knows that for 400 yards at a certain powder charge, it will know that it has to have the gun elevation at a certain distance. And so by doing this, it knows that elevation by placing a point at the rear, which is going to be called the breech point, and then another point up at the muzzle, which is your muzzle point. And it knows by using those 2 points, it will determine that this is the elevation of the cannon in relation to the carriage. So this might not be exactly to the deck, because the carriage is aligned to the deck itself. But it knows that that's the elevation of the gun. And if we know that the firing point has an elevation of, say, 2 degrees for the deck angle, then we can then compensate for the gun angle by adjusting for that 2-degree deck angle, and then we get the actual elevation of the gun. If we know that this gun with a 2-degree elevation has a certain range, then the gunners can know that placing that gun at this elevation for this gun will get us this range. So everything is all predetermined during the instantiation. Okay, so then the gun goes through its own firing process. So we tell the system to fire the gun. And the way this works is the cannon itself has the barrel object and the carriage object as separate pieces. So the barrel goes through a process of firing. When it says firing, then it tells the thing to create a cannonball, send it down range, create sound, and also create a particle effect that comes out of the muzzle point and goes out towards the world. Now, once it does the firing, and it says, okay, I've created the cannonball's on its way, everything looks good, I'll go ahead and move on to the fired process. So when the barrel says, I've fired, the cannon's carriage then says, okay, I need to recoil because the gun just fired. It begins the recoiling process. And so recoiling then moves the carriage back to a predetermined position and stops the recoil. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run the guns out. I'm going to tell them to go through the process while I'm explaining this here. So the gun then goes through the recoiling process, and it moves back and continues its travel. And we're going to have the wheels moving eventually. We just don't have that ironed out just yet. All right, so you can see that when they recoil back, that they move further back than the stowed position. They actually move a little bit too far at this point. But you can see that they have a different position than the stowed location. Stowed just means that the barrel is clearing the gunnel and is inside the boat, whereas recoiling is how far the gun's going to move back entirely. So when the gun recoils, the system knows that it's ready to be reloaded at this point. So it's recoiled, meaning that it's stopped moving and it's sitting still at the recoiled position. We go ahead and tell it to swab the gun, which is an actual step that has to be done to the gun. So the system swabs the gun and it goes through a swabbing process, then gets to swabbed, then goes through a loading process and then load. And it's actually loaded and the gun is ready to run back out again because it sees that the gun is loaded and it's recoiled, so it knows that it can go ahead and run out. At this point, the system will tell it to run the cannon back out again. It moves from the recoil position to the run out position, and then it tells the system that this gun is run out and it's loaded, which means it's ready to fire. It can go through the process of firing again, and we started that whole cycle all over again. Now the firing process, or I should say the cannon process, can actually be done without loading. You can tell this whole bank of cannons, you can go through your firing point or your battery and tell it to run out, even if not all the guns are loaded. And this is actually a tactic that's going to come into use later on when you want to present a threat to an enemy and maybe not all your guns are loaded. So let's say that you're on a 60-gun ship and you see a 74 coming up at you. You see them clearing for action. You can go ahead and run all your guns out and present a larger threat to the enemy than they really wanted to come at this point in time, and they may turn away to get away from your gun range. So you can actually present threats by using your guns once they've been run out. So the enemy will see that you've got 60 guns, and of the 60, all of them are run out, and they may only have, we'll say that they've got 15 guns ready, and the other ones are in the process of loading. So at that point, you present a greater threat to them than they can present to you, and you can adjust the battle based on that information. So this is just kind of a quick overview of how the cannons work. If you need to look up some more information, then I'd recommend you go over to the Pirates Ahoy website, because this is a very in-depth process and it's going to be a lot harder to explain over time. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember to go to piratesahoy.net to volunteer and to keep up with the news at heartsofoakgame.com. Thanks.